Um, I suspect this is the panel on which I need to say almost nothing. So I will just let you have at it. And if I have questions I want to ask or redirect, I will do that. And anyone can begin. Anyone can engage. There's no order. There's no structure.
No, let Vinny go first. He always has a lot to say.
We can react to Vinny.
Yeah, we can react to Vinny.
This is interesting. So, there was a lot of great questions being asked, thrown back and forth. I guess I just want to start with an overall thought about the work we do, right? Which is we take a bunch of troubled young people, gotten in trouble with the law, whether that's fair or not, doesn't really matter because here they are. And then we have hundreds of thousands of them if you add them all up statewide, and you got the kids in the child welfare system and the kids on probation, the kids in correctional facilities, and probably tens of thousands government workers, nonprofit organizations trying to do some combination of confine them for their safety and our safety and change their minds, change their thinking, get them to behave better. And this is, didn't just get invented last week. It's historically, it's existed since the 1800s. And I think we just sort of need to think about this as it's a process that stinks and inevitably will have a stink attached to it. And so all this research you guys are going to do, it's really sort of gradations of that stink, right? That it stink less than it stunk before. But don't think at the end of it, it's ever not going to stink, right? You have a bunch of government bureaucrats and a bunch of troubled kids. We can deprive them of their liberty. We can help them in wonderful ways. We can fail to help them in wonderful ways. By and large, there's going to be failure attached to that. And I think one could even go so far as to say there's going to be failure attached to that in significant numbers almost no matter what we do. The government can't rub up against the individual liberty of troubled young people without having that be problematic. And so I think at probation, when I was there, we always used to focus on doing less harm, doing more good, and doing it in the community. That was our sort of mantra. And it's interesting how even as that evolved, my communications guy changed it to doing no harm because he didn't want me to admit that we were doing some harm. And we are doing some harm. We will always do some harm. There's iatrogenic effects to the work we do. I take Lipitor. My doctor, checks my liver functions. Not because he's a mean doctor who wants to hurt my liver. He wants to help my cholesterol and recognizes that during the process of that, he's probably going to hurt my liver. At some point or another, I got to stop taking Lipitor and eat less red meat, right? Or whatever I got to do. And so, I think this was a good way of de-stinkifying. I don't think it was a perfect way of de-stinkifying, and I think there was some stink attached to it. The good parts were, I think the kids were too far from their homes. I don't know who was saying it didn't matter, that they were far away. I wasn't one of those. I don't think I was. If I did, I take it back. They shouldn't have been far away, right? But that wasn't the best thing, and the best thing wasn't saving the money either. And I think that was pretty clear for all of us. We weren't allowed.
Yeah, nobody was doing this. I mean, I don't know where that came from, that we were actually trying to do this to save money. Because that was never part of the calculation. It really wasn't. We understood that this was going to be really, really expensive. There might have been other disconnects, but money wasn't at the heart of it.
Was it less than savings? I think some of the conversations at some points were about redirecting money towards a larger continuum. And I think that's the part that has not necessarily yet happened, but needs to be front and center. I think she was.
Yeah, I was just going
to agree with that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that because it wasn't about saving money, but it was about using resources better. And because you couldn't think up a more inefficient use of resources than the way that it was before, right? So there was a 60% drop in youth and placement from New York City into state facilities, yet the per diem costs had increased by 125%. And so as we were sending fewer young people into the state facilities, the city, and the state, they were spending so many $1 million more, and it was partly, we all know that there was, there was a state law that you couldn't close facilities for a year after GLADYS made announcements to close facilities, so you had these empty facilities, but it was an incredible waste of resources, and so I think that was definitely one of the main things that got, certain people on board with close to home was, we could use these resources in a much more efficient and effective way than it was being used before. And it wasn't necessarily about saving the money, but it was definitely a better use.
I think you're right. I think we should always remember that the funding formula for the state facilities is the same funding formula for detention. So the waste that we saw on the state side is the waste that we saw on the city side, wearing my other hat. Mm-hmm. So, the city's lawsuit was really interesting because we had a really strong counterclaim. But, I think that we have to remember that close to home is, in its infancy. It's, an immature system. A lot has happened in 2 years. And one of the things that I would be remiss, and Felipe Franco, who's my deputy for juvenile justice, would kill me if I did not mention the fact that all of us have been very concerned about the AWOLs, for instance. It's down to 6%, which is really, really low. And so, we need to understand that, as we work to improve close to home, we will see the system mature and do better by young people, because that really is the focus. And one thing I say often, because, I wore, during the negotiations for close to home, I wore a different hat. I was the state commissioner for the Office of Children and Families. And I will say, and Vinny has said this too, the important part of close to home was bringing children back into communities. Now, the state could have done that, and the state had started to do that, and the city could do that. Either one of us is quite capable of running a really poor system, right? It's not who runs it.
That's exactly.
I just, so now I'm in a position as the city commissioner of running close to home, which is like really unique position to be in. And so I do think that the intent wasn't really to replace one system with the same system at the local level. And I think that's where we need to do a lot more work. And some conversation about, our focus in close to home, have we lost sight of other really necessary reforms? And I don't think anybody thought it was an either-or thing, right? But I think that what we need to focus a lot of energy is continuing to narrow that front door. We shouldn't be having misdemeanors come into the system. We should just not. Those young people should not be incarcerated. They should be in their communities with services wrapped around them and their families.